Hello and welcome to another interview episode of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths, with me, John Cripwell. I hope you've had a good weekend, a good sunny weekend wherever you've been. The sun has been shining here in Derby, and it's just been nice, hasn't it, to get out and about and enjoy a little bit of that sunshine. Makes such a difference at school, doesn't it, as well, when, break times and lunch times and things are a little bit sunnier. If you are lucky enough to have a school field, is that open yet? That was always a red letter day in the school calendar when our site manager said that, yes, we were finally allowed to go onto the school field. So if that's the case, I hope you've been enjoying it. I know for our Year 6 colleagues, SATs are looming, aren't they? Just around the corner, really. I hope that all the last minute preparations for those are going well. We have got a special episode that we did on SATs preparation. If you want to go back and have a listen to that chat between Becky and myself, I'll put the link in the comments. Or in the show notes, I should say. And of course, the multiplication tables check is also on the horizon. And we've got some resources that can support you with that as well, if that is on your mind at the moment, either as a maths lead or as a Year 4 teacher. So today's episode is all about a misunderstood and misrepresented, really, topic, which is dyscalculia. And I am delighted to be joined by a member of the House of Lords, a member of the Numeracy for Life Committee, and also a distinguished guest and expert from the Dyscalculia Network. So I will bring you that in just a moment. Otherwise, if you are listening to this on Tuesday as it goes out, then you might want to join us for our Teach Meets, all about problem solving, the first of 6 Teach Meets, so look out for those. What are Teach Meets? They are free bits of CPD, free CPD sessions that we run here at Twinkle, which you can sign up for. This week's one is with Becky and myself. Becky, who usually joins us on Friday for our Aftermaths episodes. And it's all around pattern spotting. It's all around pattern spotting and how that can help children with developing problem-solving skills. As I say, it's one of 6 Teach Meets that are coming up to coincide with the launch of our new problem-solving resource, which is all about how to teach children how to solve problems. It's not just a bank of problems or anything like that. It is some teacher guidance on how to actually teach the skills needed for children to become great problem solvers. So if you wanted to attend that, it's at 4:00 on Tuesday, which is Tuesday the 21st of April. If you've missed it, then if you have a Twinkle subscription, you can go back and watch that free training. Otherwise, look out for any of the other upcoming problem-solving training coming up over the next few weeks. I'll try and give you a heads up on it, but just have a Google of it, Twinkle Problem Solving Teach Meet, and you should be able to find the links to sign up for them there. Right, without further ado, let's get into today's interview. My guests today are Baroness Deborah Bull and Kat Edel, and I am delighted to have them both on the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Pleasure. Thanks for having us.
So, as always with Primary Maths Podcast, I'm always interested to find out what your experiences of maths at school were like. So just very briefly, really, perhaps, Kat, if we start with you, was maths a favourite subject of yours at school? Did you enjoy it?
I didn't enjoy school at all, really. If I'm honest, I found school really challenging, environment, especially primary school. And I went to a tiny village school where the teacher had all the year groups in Key Stage 2 together. Yep. But I really struggled with English, more with spelling. So maths was sort of my relative strength, let's say. So I enjoyed it more than English. But when I went to secondary school, I realised that because I appeared to be mostly self-taught, my maths, I think we were given a book and worked through it. I think it was peak maths back in those days. I'm showing my age here. I didn't have that conceptual understanding. And that's one of the things I'm really passionate about now, is building conceptual understanding, because I could follow procedures, but the conceptual understanding around that was a little bit rocky.
Yeah, no, I can empathise. My problem was that I wasn't brilliant at remembering procedures either. So, conceptual understanding was really important, but I didn't have that either. So, yeah, that's really interesting. How about yourself, Deborah? Was maths a particular subject that you enjoyed at school?
No, I'm clearly completely the opposite to Kat. I loved school, but I was much more a words person than a numbers person. And actually, now I see, as I think more about number processing in relation to, the subjects we're going to talk about, I see that actually I have a really strong number sense. I'm really good at understanding, estimating, understanding proportions, and seeing spatial patterns. But I think I'm afraid I just had a really bad maths teacher. And I'm sorry to say that, but maybe she was a great teacher, but it didn't work for me. And so I missed out on the ground floor. And then every subsequent floor I was flailing because I didn't have the grasp of the level before. So I always say to people, listen, I can do my VAT returns, I can do numbers, but I really didn't enjoy maths, but I did love school.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? And I think maths is particular as a subject in how much new knowledge relies on prior knowledge in order to make those connections and make things easier to understand. If you are learning about history or geography and things, some of those topics are very standalone, aren't they? But maths generally, if you take out perhaps some of the shape and space things, it really does rely on those prior knowledge, that prior knowledge, and any gaps really can become quite emphasized as you move through school. Completely understandable. We are going to be talking about dyscalculia this morning. I think it's probably prudent to start with what dyscalculia is or might be. And as I said in an email to you, Kat, we could probably do a whole series of podcasts on what dyscalculia is. I remember attending a conference last year where a whole morning was dedicated to what it might be and what it might not be. And not everybody necessarily always agrees. But in terms of an understanding for us this morning and for the listeners and for educators and parents, perhaps, what might we be thinking about with dyscalculia? Because it's not just, I'm not very good at maths, is it? I think we need to move beyond that a little bit.
Yeah. I think the first thing to say is that in England, a level 7 assessor who assesses for dyscalculia can now assess for a specific learning difficulty in maths and then dyscalculia on as a part of that, but also extra to that. So it's really important to understand this, because a specific learning difficulty in maths is where there's some processing difficulties. So the way the brain thinks about number that affect the acquisition of arithmetic and the other areas of math. And often we see this co-occurring with things like other neurodivergent conditions like dyslexia or ADHD or dyspraxia, DCD, or DLD, developmental language disorder. But with dyscalculia, it's within that specific learning difficulty of maths bracket, but it's that pronounced and persistent difficulty. It's the child in your class who you've done the intervention with, that you've used the mastery approach, you've done every conceptual thing, and they're still really struggling. They just can't seem to grasp it. And it's particularly with numerical magnitude processing, which is a bit of a mouthful, isn't it? But numerical being in numbers, magnitude being big and small, and processing being how we deal with those numbers. So it can present with age-related difficulties, and obviously it's a lifelong condition, so it's going to depend on whether you're looking at a 7-8-year-old or whether you're looking at an adult. But difficulty with naming, ordering, and comparing both physical quantities. So just looking at a pile of counters and thinking, well, which pile has more? Or as an adult in the supermarket, looking at bags of apples and going, oh, that bag has more and I need more for this week. Things like that, actual items, but also comparing numbers. So being able to look, for a young child at 5 and 7, and knowing that even if I make the 7 teeny tiny and the 5 big, the 7 is still worth more. But with a adult, that might be decimals, for example, looking at the bank balance and knowing that if it says £157.28, that 0.28 is important to understand that it isn't 17,528. So I think that was the right number I said. I had a working memory failure there. But it's comparing and ordering those numbers, and particularly in the terms of estimating and kind of having that sense of number. Just like Deborah was saying at the beginning there, she has that good sense of number, but learners with dyscalculia don't. And that impacts things like place value greatly, but then it impacts all areas of maths, because if you don't have that grounding, that sense of number, it's really difficult.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And the key as well is that it's persistent. As you say, it's a lifelong thing. It's not necessarily going to change. Can it improve?
I think that we're not talking about dyscalculia can be improved, because if you look at we're talking about something that's inherent in the way the person's brain works. Can they improve at maths? Yes, definitely. Absolutely. I don't believe that anyone can't improve with maths given the right support and help, and maybe we wouldn't be teachers if we didn't think that was
Absolutely.
possible.
Yeah. So
I think
sorry.
Apologies, I was just going to jump in. I don't know whether you were going to go there, John, but about the prevalence of it, because I think this is it's really. Of course, the figures are not entirely clear because so few people are diagnosed, but the figure that most experts are happy saying is sort of 6%. So it's between 3-10, but 6% is what people land on. And that really means that pretty much most classrooms will have a child who is dyscalculic. But the chances of them being diagnosed are 100 times less than if they had dyslexia. So I think those figures to bear it have to be borne in mind when we talk about this.
And those figures are surprising, because I don't remember. I did my PGCE 20 years ago, and I've been in education ever since. And until I stepped out of the classroom actually last year, I don't think I'd really come across, I'd spent most of my career as a maths lead and working within maths and things, and yet I don't think I'd really come across, other than a throwaway comment, perhaps they're dyscalculic, or I'm dyscalculic. I don't think I'd really come across dyscalculia as a need, as anything really. Why is that? Because certainly dyslexia was part of. Again, it was a very small part of my PGCE, I have to say. I think we probably had a couple of days on SEND generally, and dyslexia formed part of that. But at school, parents wanted children to be screened for dyslexia, and it was quite prevalent as part of the conversation, I think, around needs. But dyscalculia, not so much. Is there a reason for that? It's not a new thing, is it?
No, not. Sorry, I was who's going to
ask?
Yeah,
I know. I realise sometimes when we've got three of us on the call, it's I'm not in a room. Yeah. It's not easy to know who to go. But whoever would like to take the lead on that.
I mean, Kat, why don't you go first, and I'll come in.
Certainly. I mean, I would say, first of all, I think, and I'm sure you've come across this in your podcast, in fact, we touched upon it in the beginning, there can be a bit of a negative connotation around maths in general. And people are quite happy to say, oh, I couldn't do maths at school, or I wasn't any good at maths at school. And I think that's impacted kind of that feeling in society that it's kind of okay not to be good at maths, but there's a very big difference between it being not very good at maths, i.e., I wouldn't want to do a degree in it, and not very good at maths, but actually I have dyscalculia or a specific learning difficulty in maths. So I think there's something society going on there, that we need to change that perception around maths in general, and number confidence, and being a bit more confident about numbers. But also the research has been behind in dyscalculia, sadly. There hasn't been the funding behind it. Why that is, I feel a lot of that is to do with the fact that there wasn't, certainly in England and across the world, there hasn't been those organisations, those central organisations working to raise awareness, and certainly galvanising parent action. If you think to the story of dyslexia, or the stories of the autism, ASD, and how that's being developed, quite often there's been parents, leading that forward. But I think quite often parents themselves, maybe with maths, feel a little bit anxious about it, and that transpires into that not being the case. And obviously when we started the Dyscalculia Network, when Rob and I started that, one of the reasons for that was because there wasn't this organisation to try and raise awareness and help people, the community, to come together. Because if you haven't got somewhere for the community to come together and work together, then you're not going to get that awareness outwards.
And I think, Kat's absolutely right. Dyscalculia exists in a culture in which we think it's okay to be bad at numbers. So people who
Yeah.
are bad at numbers are assumed to be bad at numbers. And I think this spills over into parent attitudes and even teacher confidence. So there is a sort of a quite negative ground in which it sits. What we see, as Kat said, I mean, if you look at the figures on research over 10 years, UKRI, which is the country's big research funder, they spent 107 million on dyslexia research, but just 23 million on dyscalculia research. And my friends in the dyslexia sort of community will say it's 30 years behind in terms of awareness and knowledge. And I went thinking about this point. I went back to Hansard. So Hansard is the record of everything that's ever been said in Parliament. And it's really great because it's searchable. So you can search it. So I searched it on dyslexia and dyscalculia. And what I found was that the first reference to dyslexia was in 1969. And there have been 1,600 references since, whereas dyscalculia goes back only to 2003. And there's been 99 mentions, and I would swear about 50 of them are me in the last sort of 2 or 3 years.
I would imagine. Yes, yeah.
But I mean, it's not new. There was a 2008 Office for Science report in which it said because of its low profile but high impacts, it should be raised as a government priority. But of course, what's happened since then is the approach to education has moved from looking at specific conditions to deciding that all teachers should be teachers of special educational needs and that distinct training is not necessary. And it's really interesting to say, you'd never come across it. And, Kat is much more expert than me in this field, but there is very low awareness among educators and the rates of people taking up CPD, etc. So the low awareness is one of the biggest barriers, I think, that people with dyscalculia face.
It's really interesting. I'm lucky enough to work with some teaching students every year. I take a cohort through of skits, that's school-centred initial teacher trainees. So they are people that are working in school and also taking their qualification at the same time. And one of the first quotes I share with them, and I'm going to have to paraphrase it here, is that though it's a quote from a text. It says, "Those who say that they don't like maths have likely had a fear of the subject foisted on them by the type of teaching they had to endure at school." And that's that quote I then show them is from something like 1902. So it's not a new thing, this sort of feeling that if we could just teach maths a little bit better, more people would like it. And I think we've been trying to do that ever since. And yet, even though that conversation has been going on for so long, thinking about children who are, or even adults who have specific difficulties and barriers in learning mathematics doesn't seem to have been part of that conversation. I just think it's fascinating that it's been overlooked in such a way, but fantastic that people like yourselves are working so hard to raise awareness of it. Deborah, if I can ask, how did you come to be involved in this sort of work that you're doing? Because as you say, I looked at Hansard as well, and also had a little look back to see mentions of dyscalculia and things for an article I was writing recently. And your name is fairly well associated, certainly in the House of Lords, with dyscalculia.
And in a way, that's a bit worrying because I've been working on it, for 2 or 3 years now, Kat, with you, possibly only 2. It came about because I have a great niece who at the time was 10. And it was a family party, one of those family events. And she came up to me. She's quite shy. She came across the room and she said, "Please, please, please help me. Don't let Rishi Sunak introduce maths to 18." And I said, "Oh, well, why?" And she said, "Because it will destroy my life." She was really. So I went away, and we were about to do the King's speech had just happened, I think. So it was there in the King's speech, and we had the opportunity to speak in the House of Lords on that. So I started to research, what would it be like for a child who was really, I think I probably Googled bad at maths, which was, my ignorance at the time. And I came across this thing called dyscalculia, which I had never heard of. And I thought, how have I got this far in life? Never heard of it. So I started to ask around, and literally everybody I asked, the most intelligent, worldly, knowledgeable people went, "Dis what? Dis what?" They really didn't know. And of course, when they took a moment, they could work it out because it's the root of the meaning is in the word. And then I was put in touch with Kat and Rob, and we sat on a Zoom meeting like this, and I was straight into asking the questions that they said, "Can we pause? Why are you here?" They said, "Why do you know about this?" So I told them the story I just told you, and it became, well, I'm strongly driven by social justice. That's what drives me, is unfairness, and it just seems to me incredibly unfair that this low awareness is severely impacting the educational and then the life chances of a cohort of people. And it's not okay to say, "Oh, we can't have another learning difficulty. We've got enough." Which I have almost heard. I mean, I'm paraphrasing too, but that sort of feeling of and a slight denial that we might need to dive deep and have a different set of interventions and approaches for these young people. But they deserve it, because these are, intelligent, capable young people who deserve the same opportunities that we all had. So in the Lords, I was so proud to call the first ever debate in either house on dyscalculia, and it was about 9:30 at night when we got there, and Kat and Rob and some of the young adults from the network came, and it was really moving. I had 10 minutes and I made every one of those minutes count. I mean, I think I raised every issue, set it all up, because I thought this is an opportunity to put in Hansard what this is, where we are, and what needs to happen. So we continue to ask questions of ministers, and to do a lot of work behind the scenes, just trying to raise awareness and point out the logical flaws in some of the approaches to particularly to special educational needs provision. How can all teachers be teachers of dyscalculia if you haven't made it possible for them to learn about it and know how to approach and support a young person who has it?
Yeah, because we've obviously had the education white paper recently, which had a heavy focus on SEND as part of that as well, and there was an amount of money, I think 200 million, pledged towards training, but that seems, given the number of teachers in the country and the number of different specialisms that you would need, I don't know. I'm not seeing those numbers quite add up yet, but maybe I'll be wrong. But the direction of travel is interesting, isn't it? And I'm not. This is a different podcast, which I'm not going to go into right now. But it would seem beholden upon teachers, I think, and leaders in schools to be proactive in their approach to looking for CPD and looking to upskill themselves and things, which maybe shouldn't be the way it is, but I think that seems to be the way that things are going. But it'll be interesting to see what happens, I'm sure. Kat, how about yourself? How did you fall into? Well, maybe that's the wrong phrase, but how did you find yourself where you are now?
So when I worked in schools, I worked in big primary schools to start with. I've always I fit into the neurodivergent category myself, so I've always kind of had that affiliation for children who were struggling either kind of in the school place mentally, like I did, or with different academic topics. That's always been my interest, my natural kind of fall towards the children who were finding it hard. And I was just fortunate. I couldn't get training in a state school. That was the bottom line. There was already a Senko. There was no budget for anyone else to have any training. And I actually moved to work in a boys' private school for boys with learning difficulties. And it was there that I just had this amazing opportunity at Emerson House in London, which was run by Jane Emerson and Doreen Yeo at the time. And Doreen Yeo was the most inspirational person as regarding changing maths learning difficulties training, and I trained with her back in, it's a long time ago now, 2003. I'm showing my age. Back in 2003, and that training with Dorian changed the way I taught maths. It changed the way I thought about children's learning, and I've been on a journey ever since then, working in different schools. And then I started working for myself, and it was through working for myself, I suppose, when you're in a school environment, people came to me for advice, and I would look up, if there was something I didn't know, I'd look it up and then pass it back. But when I worked for myself, I was like, well, where do I send people to if I can't help? If I can't teach their child because I'm fully booked, what do I do? Or if I can't teach this adult because, that's not my, they're at a certain level that I can't help with. And that's when I just woke up in the middle of the night one night and went, there should be a Dyscalculia network. What is there for Dyscalculia? And I Googled and I was like, there was Dyscalculia Association, which was Steve Chin and Judy Hornigold, who I knew.
Yep.
But they weren't particularly an advocacy group, or it was a bit different. And I literally was like, this is what we need to do. And that's literally how the Dyscalculia Network was born. A thought late at night.
Yeah. Well, I think that's how many things come to fruition, isn't it? Certainly in my experience.
And I was very fortunate to meet Rob at that time, who was equally as keen on helping children due to his own experience and with his own son. And yeah, we just built it from there. It needed two of us for sure.
So just to go back to the teacher or the parents who is working with a child, and maybe one of my teachers thought like this, I have tried to teach them their times tables now for 6 weeks, and they're just not getting it, and I remember that I wasn't brilliant because for me, I think because I wasn't particularly interested in it, I would rather have been reading a book. I didn't really see the point of learning my times tables. Turned out later I could learn them, and you'll be happy to know, very good at them now. Don't test me. So I didn't have a particular barrier other than the fact that I wasn't particularly engaged or interested in it, I think. But how do we spot that there may be a specific learning difficulty with maths? Kat, maybe this is one for you.
Yeah.
I think, what are the signs that we're looking for?
Yeah, I think we first of all need to understand, obviously, that everyone is different. So signs in one person might be slightly different to signs in the other, and that's really important. And also, I think really important to keep in mind that there can be co-occurring difficulties that can cause a difficulty with maths where it wouldn't be dyscalculia, but it's still that specific learning difficulty in maths. So we should still be thinking about that. I think it's that persistent, first of all. So despite your intervention groups, despite, working really hard, it's like they forget. It's just gone. Particularly, we can have that kind of feeling that you've learned number bonds or times tables over and over. The parents practiced, everyone's practiced, but rote learning isn't working for them.
That there was a feeling that they knew it yesterday, but today it's gone.
Yeah, today it's
we've
gone.
all felt that as teachers. I'm sure we've all felt that frustration at some point. No, they could do
absolutely.
this yesterday.
Often it's very ones-based strategies, so they're understanding, not that there's anything wrong with using fingers for math. I still worked out the other day that I still count time using my fingers. If I've got to work out hours, I do it with my fingers. It was an interesting observation of my own thinking. But things like number bonds, again, all in ones. So not even, I don't know if your people are going to see this, but even if I put up 4 and 4 and go, oh, it's 8 because it's 4 and 4, it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Very much ones-based understanding, running out of fingers and toes to count. A little child said to me the other day, I prefer doing subtraction to 10. And I was like, why is that? And he's like, I don't run out of fingers. And I was like, that's a good summary of struggling with maths, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think as children get older, we notice it in time and time management, not really having a sense of time. So might struggle with organisation, therefore, of themselves. And quite often that really shows in adults, because obviously when we're in a school environment, time is very much organised for us. Our parents often kick us out of bed, get us ready, harass us to be in a certain time frame. School is timetabled, the lessons. And there's the things kind of executively, slightly slower processing, which can really impact, therefore, they're still thinking about the title when you're halfway through the explanation of the first thing that we're doing. Those executive functioning difficulties, so like the working memory, if there's poor working memory, and they're really struggling to hold on to that information in their head, like I was when I said that number earlier and then was like, oh, what did I say? That type of thing. But also in the areas of kind of vocabulary, not really understanding the vocabulary, really struggling to apply it to word problems. And yes, lots of children struggle with the reasoning aspect, but really, really struggling in those areas. But I think that it's really obviously noticed, I think, sometimes in end of term tests, when you've got a big class, and you think maybe the child it's all fine because they're following day to day. But then when you come to look at that summary test, you realise that there's big gaps, and actually what you thought they knew they didn't know.
Yeah.
And rather than thinking, oh, this child struggles in test situations, they may struggle in test situations, but it could be more than that. It could be that they're struggling to retain those basics. There's checklists around that are a really good starting point for gathering evidence. They're not a diagnosis, but they do just help to get your brain kind of thinking, well, where are these areas that the child is struggling with? And probably, is connected very much, and we touched upon this earlier, is the anxiety.
Yeah.
So if we've got anxiety around numbers, we can't think straight. We also get, the times table tummy ache, as Rob always says, or, the not coming into school on the day when there's a maths test. And dyscalculia is very different from maths anxiety. They're two completely different things. Somebody can be brilliant at maths and have anxiety, but I think for learners with maths difficulties, that anxiety is kind of knotted in there.
Yeah, we've had a couple of episodes on maths anxiety. Actually, it was something I was interested in early on because I think I empathised with it. So if listeners are interested in maths anxiety specifically, there's an episode with Heidi, which was our first ever episode, actually. I also spoke to Dr. Tom Hunt from the University of Derby, actually, on our Leading With podcast about the subject. And they wrote a book together on it, which I found fascinating. But as you say, it makes sense, doesn't it, that maths anxiety might, if you have dyscalculia or dyscalculic tendencies, then maths anxiety might form a part of that because it's a subject that you are finding it difficult to access. So, yeah, and as you say, Kat, we're not trying to diagnose people on the back of having listened to a podcast on dyscalculia, but I'm sure there will be teachers listening who think, yeah, I can see that with a particular pupil in my class. That makes sense now, and maybe I should investigate that a little bit further. Where could teachers go to find out a little bit more about those sorts of things?
Well, they could start on our website, which is www.dyscalculianetwork.com.
We'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, thank you. It's got lots of free information for educators on what dyscalculia is, checklists, screeners that are available, assessment for interventions that are available, some apps like programs for children with maths difficulties who are struggling with maths. So there's lots of information there. We do a free monthly Q&A session, so that's not recorded, so people can talk freely about their experience. They can just come along and ask a question and say, oh, help. There's something upcoming that I feel, there's a child here that I'm feeling anxious about, and I'm just trying to remember what the date is of the next one. It's Monday the 27th of April is the next one, at 7:00 in the evening if you're listening in the UK. But yeah, so we do those, and I think that it's just, start the conversation. Go to your, if you're a class teacher, go to your Senko and say, what have we got for dyscalculia here? Sometimes I find Senkos have some books or some information about dyscalculia, and maybe it hasn't reached that teacher, especially if you're new to a school. But it's equipping yourself. We offer training too. So lots of things you can do to upskill yourself so you feel more confident in your own journey.
And for leaders listening to this, if you happen to be a school leader or maybe a Senko, what's the way forward, do you think? Maybe Deborah, I don't know if you've got an opinion on this, but in terms of raising that awareness, how do we go about making sure that more teachers are and more parents are aware of specific learning difficulties in maths? It isn't just I'm not a maths person. How can we start to change that narrative?
So one of the things we've been calling for is for DFE, the Department for Education, to have a statutory definition of dyscalculia on their website because they don't. Similarly, on the NHS list of conditions, now it's not exactly a medical condition, it's a neurodevelopmental condition, but the NHS A to Z lists dyslexia and dyspraxia, but not dyscalculia. So I think, starting with giving it official sort of recognition at government level. I would love to see equal focus on numeracy in policy making. So if you look at the initial teacher training framework, there are multiple mentions of literacy throughout, but I don't think numeracy is mentioned at all.
No.
We have a national year of reading right now. When's the national year of numbers? I don't think it's scheduled yet. So I do think there's some high profile things that government could do. I would like to see. I'm pushing on behalf of the community for the idea of early screening, because we've had a fantastic mass intervention in terms of raising all levels of reading through phonics. We've not had a similar intervention, even though at the last election, you might remember that government was talking about phonics for maths. We don't really know what that would be, but where is the sort of mass intervention, the mass recognition that numeracy is of equal importance? And sort of year one or early stage screening, so that kids have the best chance from the outset. I mean, I do think CPD is really important. I was astonished. There was some figures out from Shift in 2025 which showed that maths teachers, like your good self, only 14% have received any training in dyscalculia. You would think it should be 100%. Given the prevalence rates. So I can only imagine the pressures on head teachers and Senkos and school leads. And, I step back here and say, I'm not, I'm in Parliament, I'm in policy. That's what I'm advocating for. But I think for head teachers to ask the question. I mean, Kat, you might want to say something about the survey that we're going to do to understand awareness levels, because, the awareness, even the sort of the even slightly aware, the last figures that we saw were sort of 42, only 42% were not at all or only slightly familiar. So half your workforce doesn't understand it. So I think for school leads to just ask the question, what do people know about this? What information do you need?
And it is interesting, isn't it? Because you say that the focus on reading and literacy, clearly very, very important, and you can't really be a mathematician if you don't have literacy skills as well. But we also know that early attainment in maths is one of the best indicators of later future attainment across all subjects. So having an awareness of the importance of early numeracy and early maths and supporting people who might find that difficult to achieve would seem to be a natural next step for trying to raise attainment generally. That would make sense to me.
And we describe it as a bit like a Jenga tower. I don't know if you know the Jenga game, where you've got bricks on top of each other, and the learners, and Deborah described herself in this category, who've got these missing blocks at the bottom of the tower. Those very fundamental place value, number bonds, those really fundamental things that we build maths on. These are the learners that, if we can get that early intervention and get these blocks in and not try to put too much on the top, because we know as we play the game of Jenga, if there's blocks missing, we put them on the top, it doesn't get better. And that is really important for maths. And a clear thing for me is children should have accessible maths that they can access and they can do. And yes, they need to be in the growth zone, of course. We don't want them just cruising along doing something that's too easy. But we also need to make sure that they are in the growth zone and they're not in outside of that. And many learners, I fear, with dyscalculia are being put through lessons where they're not actually have any understanding of what's going on whatsoever.
And that's very difficult, isn't it? Because when you've got 30 children in a class, I've been there many times. Didn't very rarely had another adult support in the classroom, and you want to help everybody, but it's very hard to put specific things in place and teach multiple different lessons at the same time. Although some teachers. Yeah, exactly. I know there'll be colleagues listening in small schools, much like the one that you attended, Kat, who I work with, who are trying to teach year 3, 4, 5, and 6 at the same time in their classroom. And then you add in, additional needs and things. It's very, very difficult. But what are the sorts of things that we can put in place to help in the short term if we're thinking, okay, this child, I don't have a diagnosis. It's not my place to diagnose them, but I am their teacher and I can see that they are struggling with this. I want to help them. Perhaps there is some element of dyscalculia here or another specific learning need. Until that is identified, what can they do? What sorts of things are shown to help
I think
those pupils?
the really important thing from my point of view that you need to do first is actually find out, first of all, start that ball rolling of gathering the evidence, because we know it's a long process. So if you start gathering the evidence and raising these concerns, raise the concern with the Senko, with the head, whoever's your line manager effectively, and say, oh, I've got a concern about this child. So get that emotion early. Don't just think, oh, they're not doing so well, let's see how they do next year. And then the next teacher gets to know them for 6 months and then says, oh, well, they're going to be leaving me soon, we'll see. Do you know what I mean? Let's do something, let's action something. I think that we need to know where it is the child is struggling. And that is probably the hardest thing, like you say, when you've got a big class, is, well, what is it this child is really struggling with? If we're doing equivalent fractions, I always use this example because I like fractions. So if we're doing equivalent fractions, and the child is getting the White Rose end of term or the Twinkle end of term test incorrect on equal, why is that? We often will just go down marking, oh, they got equivalent fractions wrong. But why did they get equivalent fractions wrong? Is it because they can't do their times tables? Is it because it was a division question? Is it because it's over the 6 times tables and they're stuck on 7s and 8s? Is it because they don't have a conceptual understanding of what that means? What is going on behind the scenes? So my first thing is, let's peel back. Let's find out where the problem is, because if we don't know where the problem is, we can't help. Rob and Jane Emerson have got an amazing book called The Maths and Dyscalculia Assessment, which is well worth its weight in gold of running it quickly with a child or an adult to find out where those gaps are. And then if you can go back a bit and circle back, I think that's amazing. That isn't, as you say, always possible if you haven't got the support. The thing for me would be concrete pictorial abstract, really working on that mastery approach. And that includes for secondary school children who have these missing foundations as well. Just because we're in secondary school doesn't mean we don't need manipulatives. That could be for everybody. Manipulatives don't have to just be for the learners who have got maths difficulties. We don't want them just being given them, not with anyone else. But I think there's a part of the concrete pictorial abstract that we kind of miss. And again, there's another whole conversation here about visualizing maths and verbalizing what we're thinking. And I think that's a really important thing that teachers can do, which is really encourage learners to look at those resources and then close their eyes and imagine them, take pictures of them, look at those pictures, and talk about what they're learning. There's a whole conversation again around oracy and maths, but I think verbalizing thinking and that metacognition is really important. Little easy things is breaking the teaching down a bit for them. If they need 15 minutes to do 10 questions, let's not give them 20, let's just give them 10, so they can feel that success. And if the first couple of questions on the worksheet we're pretty certain they can do, that's another little easy way of reducing the anxiety, because none of us like starting a new topic with something in the first question we're like, oh, don't know what to do. So if we can break it down a little bit, I think that's really important. But I think for me, the one thing that any teacher can do, and lots of adults talk to me about this, the fact that they felt their teacher didn't have empathy towards the fact they were struggling. Their teacher didn't really get that they were struggling. They kind of were just like, try harder. So I think just having empathy for those learners who are struggling, and I can't think of a teacher I know who isn't like that, but I think just having that empathy, but then using praise. It's a simple thing, but how many times does a child who's struggling with maths hear praise associated with maths?
Yeah.
Probably not very often. So if we can be mindful of that extra praise for the effort they're putting in trying to get it right, or even just for being in that room while that's going on, because I don't know about you, but I do suffer with anxiety. And if there's something I'm anxious about, I don't want to do it every day. And in a school, these children have to do maths every day. So I think, giving them that praise and saying, you're doing so well, I can see you're trying really hard, and, verbalizing how you work out the answer to give them that scaffolded support is really important. That's very brief. I could talk on this for ages.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're we're not going to stop, but if we can put some ideas into teachers and parents' heads and things, and then give additional places for them to go to look. But I think the biggest thing, as you just sort of said, is having that empathy, and without having an awareness that this may be a specific learning difficulty, you may be less inclined to have that empathy, because you may think that it is just a case of working harder or doing it again. Whereas I think if there's an awareness that there are people in the world that have a specific learning difficulty with mathematics, then you might be a bit more inclined to think, actually, maybe there's something else I need to do here. The other nice thing that I picked out of that actually is many of the things that you mentioned there, Kat, are just what we would call good teaching, really, and that idea that providing good teaching for everybody kind of, it raises everybody a little bit. I would love to see more of the concrete pictorial abstract approach used in secondary schools. I think that's slowly, but we've been saying that for a long time, slowly becoming more commonplace. But it would be great to see that. I think we do see it quite a lot in primaries, but again, having an awareness of how is it affecting all pupils, and just opportunities to go a little bit slower
That's
can
exactly
help
what I was about
everybody
to say.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's not just a little bit slower; it's quite a lot slower. And
Yes.
adults tell us that, I've got quotes from adults saying, that was the main thing. It just all went too fast. The pace is so fast. When you look at the maths curriculum, there is so much to fit in, and it's so fast paced. And now the learners with dyscalculia need much longer to do each thing. So I think, the last and most important thing is more time. More time to practice, more time to do things. Get involved. If you're a parent listening, go to the school and say, how can I help at home? What can I do? If you're in a school and you have the opportunity of having very supportive parents, get them on board. What can they practice? That is really important. Teach them how to do that.
And it's difficult, isn't it? Because as you say, if it's a subject that you don't enjoy, the last thing you might want to do is spend more time doing it. And certainly I would hate to think that people were missing out on other subjects that they did feel successful in order to spend time in maths interventions and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So the more that we can do, I suppose, within a lesson, the better.
Well,
But also with that empathetic eye to think, how can we have some early success? How can we celebrate that success and begin to change a person's perspective over how they
yeah,
feel about themselves as a mathematician?
yeah,
It can only be a benefit, I suppose.
yeah,
The other thing, I suppose, Deborah, for you then is that on the policy side of things, that we have a new curriculum being developed at the moment. There was a lot of talk before that about the amount of content in certainly the primary maths curriculum. I think some of that is being rejigged a little bit, and some of it is being moved into Key Stage 3. But it's very difficult, I think, to be able to go slowly through a curriculum when there's a pressure to cover a huge amount of content. How? Yeah, I'm not sure what the answer is to that, Deborah, and I'm not expecting you to have that at your fingertips. But it's interesting that is sort of the feedback I've heard from lots of teachers, and Kat was saying from lots of adults as well.
Well, the thing with the curriculum reforms, we're still waiting for the working through. A lot of what Becky Francis provided was a direction of travel, but then there was going to be detailed work. So the resequencing of certain parts of education, I think we're still waiting to sort of see where that is. In the Lords, I was able to I was successful in submitting an application for a special inquiry into low numeracy. So this is, I was aware that perhaps I wouldn't have succeeded in getting an inquiry into dyscalculia just yet, but I was raising the issue that low numeracy, which is among adults is 50%, have low numeracy, that its impacts on individuals, on the economy and on society.
Yeah.
And so we are looking into that. And it's very interesting in these early sessions, having people like Hannah Fry and Bobby Siegel coming in and arguing positively about the ways in which the curriculum is disadvantages some children. Because as you said at the very beginning, John, it's almost as it's a subject in which the foundations are so important. You are literally building a house, whereas with most other subjects, you can sort of go in on the first floor and become very expert at the first floor. You don't need the foundations. This is not true in maths. So it's well worth, seeing what those people are saying to us about how they'd like to see the curriculum changed.
I was just checking there, actually, that there is a current call for evidence, isn't there, for the Numeracy for Life Committee? So
There is.
yes, up until Monday the 27th of April, people can submit their evidence towards that. So I'll put a link to that as well into the show notes as well, because there's all sorts of things.
Really great. Thank you.
Yeah, there's
And
all sorts of things that are going on, but it feels like something that needs to gather pace, but you have to start somewhere, don't you, I suppose? And
I also remember listening a long time ago. I listened to Ruth Mertens at a Dyscalculia conference. I don't know if you remember Ruth Mertens. She was part of the Abacus series of maths books back then.
I remember the Abacus series of maths books.
Yeah, Ruth Mertens was one of the people involved in that. And I remember her saying, pare it back for those learners. What is the essential things for them to learn? And for me, that's impacted my practice. I'm like, what are the key things I want these learners to learn? What is a good universal way that they can do, like addition, partitioning, like that's a good mental method. Let's be consistent with that approach. So I think also there's opportunities there for schools to look at their calculation policies and to make sure that their calculation policies allow for strategies that can continue throughout the child, so they don't get 15 different ones that they're not sure how to use any of them. For those learners who are struggling, for other learners, maybe, it's great that they explore different things, but for learners who are struggling, one way they can do well is really, really key, because that gives confidence. So I think there's little things we can do there just to pare the curriculum back for those learners and focus on those foundational skills that are going to be useful for money, for time, for, day-to-day life later, shopping.
Absolutely. So I'm aware that time is getting away from us, and as we've said about 3 times during this podcast, we could probably do a whole series on dyscalculia and really get into the weeds of it. However, it'd be great to end on your optimistic thoughts for the future. What would you like to see happen next in terms of a growing support for people who may have a specific learning difficulty in mathematics? What would be your sort of wish list for, I don't know, the next 5 years, perhaps? Kat, could I come to you first? What would you like to see happen next?
Oh goodness, I've got a long wish list. I'm like a child at Christmas.
If you could pick out maybe the top 2 or 3 things that you think would make a huge difference.
I'd like to see educators being given the opportunity to learn more about dyscalculia, being given the time to do that. And with the offset of, I'd obviously like to see children with dyscalculia recognised in schools. Obviously the ideal would be to see more children actually getting diagnosed early. But that early intervention, I think, and early support is key for maths. And that does need funding, because as we've just said, one teacher on their own, I think it's a little bit easier to differentiate maybe an English class or a history class by outcome a little bit more than it is by maths. So I think, we do need that funding to get to have that extra help in the maths classes, so the children who are struggling do get that intervention.
Amazing. Okay, thank you. Deborah, what would be on your wish list?
So I do think the DFE definition is really important, and I think that's doable. There's no cost to that. I think it would give people confidence and comfort, actually, to see it recognized. I think all policymakers and civil servants should have a little Post-it sticker on their wall, so that when they're writing policies, they make sure they consider numeracy as well as literacy. And this really goes, throughout. It is amazing how much all governments say that, STEM subjects are the answer to our economic challenges, but they're happy to have a teacher training framework which is blind to, numeracy. I know it's not entirely, but the word numeracy gets missed out all the time. So I think raising numeracy to have as much importance, not more importance, but literacy and numeracy are important life skills. And then I guess the other point probably for me would be educator training opportunities, because there has been a real deficit, and teacher awareness seems to be it is the first place a child is going to be identified as having dyscalculia. Let's face it, you're probably not going to see it at home because you're not likely to be doing much number play. I don't know, maybe you are, but school is so important. So and I appreciate the pressure on teachers, but I think teachers do want to do the best for their pupils, and I think it would give them more tools to be able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right in terms of number at home. We know that comes up all the time in singing songs and counting, just little things like counting out the cutlery for dinner and things like those. But you are possibly, as a parent, less in a position to necessarily immediately notice that there's something different if you don't have a point of reference, whereas I suppose teachers have got that point of reference.
Although parents do tend to know their children very well, and quite often it's parents who are going to schools because I think lockdown had a big impact on this too, but parents are going into school saying, my child is struggling with their homework in maths, or my child doesn't seem to be remembering this. What could be going on? And I think we are starting to get the awareness amongst parents. And again, I'd like to see that grow, because the more awareness among parents, there's that parent support on the system then to advocate for the right support.
Yeah, I completely agree. It would be great to have everybody working together in the same direction, wouldn't it? Thank you so much for your time this morning. I really do appreciate it. And I know that listeners will have taken lots away from it. And I very much hope it won't be the last time that we discuss dyscalculia on this podcast and elsewhere at Twinkle as well. So thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure we'll speak again.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. Thank you. Bye.
No problem at all. Thank you. Take care.
Bye.